Welcome to Center for Civic Innovation. Who is this your first time here? First time? So a couple folks, welcome. So if you haven't joined us before, we've been, I think this is too much. This is way too much. Yes, okay. So if you haven't joined us before, we've been hosting conversations like this for the last couple of years, trying to get people to kind of understand a little bit more about how their government works, places where they can make a difference. This particular series has been going on all year here as part of a coalition called Our Future Atlanta. So it's a group of nonprofits that got together to say, you know, it's an election year. So if you didn't know, it's an election year. November 7th, you can pick new mayor, city council, and school board. If you want to vote early, you can do that starting October 16th. But we decided, you know, it's an important year for our city. We get all new folks in power. And it might be good if you'll new about the issues that matter most. So we did a big poll of 2,000 Atlantans to kind of see what were they seeing as big issues. We came up with a list of them that, you know, a lot of people had in common. And so we've done a conversation every month on different ones. And this month being government accountability. So one of the things we heard from a lot of folks was, you know, I show up to stuff sometimes, or I vote, but I don't feel like anybody's really listening. I don't really know how government's supposed to be interacting with me, and I don't really know how it's accountable. And that can be really frustrating. So what usually happens is that means, you know, people show up to government-sponsored activities, so maybe they come and they want to ask you some questions about what kind of MARTA station you want in your backyard, and then you show up and you get really upset because you feel like no one's listening to you. And if you're, you know, city council rep, as my friend Leslie Nope back here, you know, she really likes it when you show up and get mad and yell into the microphone, but for most people, that's not a really good interaction with government, and that doesn't make you feel like they're very accountable. If you feel like you have to yell to make them hear you. The other thing that tends to happen is people don't know who government's supposed to be listening to, so I found myself a meme. You know, people feel like my voice doesn't matter, but maybe corporations' voices matter, or maybe somebody who is a big donor matters, or the media matters. But you know, we want to talk tonight a little bit about how that actually plays out and where are kind of ways that we can change that and make sure when we elect new leaders, they are accountable to us this year. So we have a couple of really great experts tonight who will provide you much more information than I ever could on this topic. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. We have a couple of questions we'll ask them to get kicked off, and then we'll be allowing y'all to ask questions as well.
Wow. Check, check.
All right. That's very loud. Sorry. I was trying to turn you over and all of a sudden. Cool. I'm pretty loud. So thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it. You know, this is a conversation that the Center for Civic Innovation has been having a lot with different groups, having conversations throughout. We just celebrated our 3rd birthday, which is kind of exciting last week. Thanks, we can sing after all this is over. But when we thought about why CCI was created in the first place, a lot of it centered around you know, a bunch of people who wanted to be involved in their city, but didn't exactly know how they could get involved. And when you start to realize that there are a lot of amazing programs that cities run and do, and counties run and do, and that states run and do, you start to realize that we don't have a lot of information on why decisions are made the way that they are, how those decisions actually got made in the first place, and what the role of people is throughout that. So I'm excited to moderate this conversation, to get a sense of your work, your experience, and then to get a sense of, you know, what your stance is on how we can be thinking about this issue area moving into an election year. And next year we're going to have new leadership across the city, so offering some advice and feedback for them as well. So I thought, by way of getting a sense of who you are, I'd love to know, first of all, what actually got you to care about government? Do you have a earliest moment where you were like, man, I give a damn about this? Because you don't have to. There are a lot of people who just have given up on it, but all 3 of you have dedicated your life to making government better. So I'd love to get a sense of what's your earliest, maybe childhood or mid-childhood or mid-career memory that you have of when you started to realize that you wanted to be engaged with government?
Hi, I'm Clay, and I got a call in 2002 from my mom, who
Was that the first time she called you?
she told me that she had cancer, and my dad had retired a year prior to that, but he was going to need to go back to work because while he was eligible for Medicare, she was not. And her health insurance company had raised her health insurance from $250 a month to $3,000 a month. And so if she wanted to live and get a radical mastectomy and chemo and all of that stuff, then my dad would have to go back to work. And I thought about that and thought that that was pretty messed up. I mean, so I did what every other 20-something-year-old did at the time, which was pack up the back of their Volkswagen and drive to Vermont to go work for a man named Howard Dean. And was his lead programmer on his campaign, and then founded a consultancy called Blue State Digital, which built BarackObama.com in 2008 and 2012. But that's what got me started, was cancer.
Did you think about, did your parents talk about politics in the house? Were they very engaged in government as well?
So, funny story about that. No, in fact, they purposefully kept that away from me. They didn't want me near it, not because they thought it was bad for me, but because they wanted me to. My dad's a psychiatrist, my mom's a psychiatrist, they're nuts. But they wanted me to formulate my own political conclusions. It was only after the Dean campaign that my dad told me that he rode in a car as a delegate with Julian Bond and John Lewis to the 1968 Democratic National Convention. So, you know, it was an interesting discovery of that route without knowing that I really had it, but yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, love to hear it.
So, hi, I guess I'm the girl on the panel. We have a little sandwich going on here. So Deborah Scott, I run an organization called Georgia Stand Up, and we're a think and act tank for working communities. And we work a lot with marginalized communities that really either cannot get to city council meetings because they're during the day, or they have issues that have been compounded for years and they've been left out of the process. So if you look at the city as east, west, north, south, it's a tale of two cities or a tale of two regions. And so we mostly work with communities that are marginalized on the southwest, southeast, and northwest side of Atlanta. But I graduated from Clark Atlanta University, and it was Clark College back then. And I was a student activist, and I went from being a student activist to working with Maynard Jackson's campaign. And so part of my activism, I just assumed that government is supposed to work for the people. And then I worked for government, and then I realized, oh shit, it doesn't, right? Sometimes, right? So part of my journey has been to kind of uncomplicate government for the community so that they know where those points of power are, know how to push, know what committees they need to go to make the decisions. Most people don't know that decisions around zoning are often made 4 to 5 years before something comes out of the ground. So just demystifying government has been part of what we've been able to do with community.
Go ahead, ask me. What's the question you got? Okay. Please, yeah.
I'm William Perry. I'm with Georgia Ethics Watchdogs, and I'm hoping that my voice sticks around. I'm over an illness, so have no fear sitting next to me. But my voice is kind of come in and out, so bear with me if it does. Yeah, Georgia Ethics Watchdogs, we work to hold local governments and state government accountable. I do that a lot of times through filing ethics complaints or shining a spotlight on the activities of public officials when they step outside the bounds. I started that group about 2 years ago after being fired very publicly from a group called Common Cause Georgia. You can look up the story, it's a good one. But I spent about 5 years kind of doing the same thing along with Common Cause. And I don't know where it started early on, but my parents did conduct an experiment when I was young to try to predict what my career path would be. And while I was sleeping beside on my little nightstand by my bed, they put money, a stack of cash, a Bible, and a little bottle of liquor. I didn't know what kind it was. Deborah told me it was Johnny Walker once I described it. I was like, well, I should know that. But when I woke up in the morning, they thought if I picked up the cash, I'd go on and be financially successful like a banker or something. If I picked up the Bible, I'd follow the Lord's path and become a preacher. If I picked up the bottle of liquor, well, I wasn't going to amount much. To their surprise, I grabbed the cash, stuck it in my jacket, grabbed the liquor bottle, put it in my back pocket where nobody could see it, and then tucked the Bible under my arm for all the world to see. And that's when their greatest fear was discovered. They knew I was going to work in politics. And once I got to college, I got into politics. Outside of that, I went on and worked for our former U.S. Senator Max Cleland, who was at that time Secretary of State of Georgia, and had a lot of fun doing things along that. Now I kind of consider myself the anti-politician because I frequently get in entanglements with both Republican leaders all the way up to the governor, to Democratic leaders up to our mayor here in Atlanta. And probably my best day in politics was when the Speaker of the House, a Republican in Georgia, declared me the head of a liberal advocacy group. At the same time, the mayor said I was involved in a right-wing conspiracy to overthrow Georgia's government. So if you get accused in the same day of both, you're doing pretty good. So that's usually where I stand.
There you go. So your parents are very proud today. My parents put an MCAT book in front of me and really figured it out as a child. So that's
My parents worry a lot.
Yeah.
Especially when I start my car.
There you go. Fair enough. Deborah, I want to start with a question for you. Just do politicians care what people have to say? Like, do they? I mean, genuinely, is it just? Do they care?
Well, the good thing is, this is the sweet
And you
spot.
can be honest. You're saying.
Oh, and I'm not being taped. I'm honest all the time.
Yeah.
So yes, they do care. They care in a couple of ways and different times of the year. So this is the caring time. This is the sweet spot of the election. Right before they ask for your vote. They're everywhere. I think there's a candidate forum every day. We had one on Thursday. You may have heard about it. It kind of had fireworks happening the last couple of ones we had. But yeah, they care because, it's two types of power. It's either organized money or organized people. And so they care about the organized money. And then they care about those organized voices that could get them unelected or get them elected. So they do care to some degree. When I worked for a city council member, the way I will say, determined how she was going to vote on a particular issue it depends on how many calls they got that morning. So did we have 5 people against it or 5 people? And you realize that 5 people could make a difference if their mind is not made up. So, sometimes you have to call those 5 people and say, you need to call here and tell them you really care. So one, they care if they get an email. They care if they get a phone call. If they get a letter, all hell is breaking loose, right? And then if you come to City Hall or City Council or Fulton County or even to the state, that really makes a difference. They need to see the numbers. Power concedes nothing without demand, never has and never will, is really true. So the more you can have an organized group go up to government and really participate in the process, it really does make a difference.
Can you give me an example of where power of people was more powerful than power of money? Has that ever been the case?
Well, yeah, I mean, it happens, but you know, you have to give them pressure. So recently, you may have heard about all of these different stadiums that are happening, you know, billion-dollar stadiums here and there. So the Falcons, and I see some folks from the Turner Field, you all are right on cue. So recently, a group of activists really came up to City Hall and demanded money for a trust fund. Now, this is a day that the city was going to give or pen a deal for $197 million to go to the Phillips Arena to get renovated. And here you had a community or communities that had been impacted by lack of investment for years and years, had given up their homes, had given up their communities. This is the Turner Field neighborhoods. And had a tent city for 63 days. And all the promises that were made were not kept, not just now, but for the last 30 to 40 years. And so literally a group of activists went up to City Hall and demanded that this trust fund be set up and that all the money go to Phillips Arena. So if you would say it was supposed to be a $10 million trust fund, they actually gave $5 million. At the end of the day, we probably felt like, you know, this was a battle and we only got $5 million, but the fact is it's a start, but it's a drop in the bucket to what's needed in the community. So that was a partial win.
Clay, you know, a little bit what,
So I want to check the framing here, right? Because I agree with some of what you said, but I don't agree with all of what you said, because I think politicians is a very broad term, right? And it is the case that cynical politicians care about money or votes, but there are plenty of politicians that I know that show up because they care. Now, a lot of them are not in the city of Atlanta, but I was the chairman of a public charter school board, a Title I public charter school board, elected chairman of a public charter school board in South Fulton County. And I showed up there as, I guess, a politician because the average third grade reading score in South Fulton County, according to the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, is 32, and the average third grade reading score in North Fulton County is 81. And I thought that was messed up, and it wasn't something that anybody cared about. And I wasn't getting paid for the job, nor was anybody else on the board getting paid for the job. My city council, I don't live in the city, but my city council down in South Fulton County is all volunteers, and I don't agree with most of them, but I can't say that they're showing up for money or votes because they're not getting either of them.
so what are they showing up for? Why do you think?
I think they're showing up for service or for ego, but I don't. I think that watchdogging is an important and vital thing. I spent a large part of my career working for the Sunlight Foundation, which is one of the larger and more successful federal watchdog organizations in the world. Watchdogging is vital and it is important, but it also has its limitations in that it can become very cynical if it's not managed appropriately, and it can lead people to dealing, I think, with problems. I'm going to try and say this in a way that makes sense because I'm a programmer, and so sometimes I talk like a programmer. Apologize, but dealing with problems at the top of the stack, right? So like the surface level, the tip of the iceberg, rather than what's at the bottom. So we talk about, for instance, public meetings and making public meetings more accessible. I wanted to have the most equitable and transparent public school board humanly possible. It is in my roots to do that. And so my thought was, I've got my school board members, I've got 11 school board members, they all live within a 40-mile radius of my school. It's a pain for us to meet. wouldn't it be great if we could go on Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever and have a meeting of our board and allow for parents to tune in from their homes to view that meeting of the board, so they didn't have to show up. They could submit public comments digitally. And we could record it for all to see so that the parents could view it on YouTube or wherever they would like later on. And it turns out that is completely illegal. That would not be in the state of Georgia, in any public body in the state of Georgia. That is a violation of the Georgia Open Meetings and Open Records Act, because a quorum of that board must be in the same physical place. And as long as it's got a street address and you can put it on a map, if a quorum is there and you publish a 24 hours notice, well, that's considered an open meeting. So I could have a meeting for my charter school in South Fulton County on the southern tip of Cumberland Island at low tide, so no boats could get there. At 2 o'clock in the morning, as long as I got a quorum and I take minutes, that's a public meeting. But if I live stream it and record it on the internet, that's not a public meeting. But that Open Records and Open Meetings Act isn't something that people want to pay attention to. Instead, we want to pay attention to reschedule your meetings or move, take better minutes. And we could be dealing with stuff, these forcing functions at the bottom of the iceberg, that I think could make a heck of a lot of difference in how participatory government is, especially, I'll stop talking in a second, but especially in schools. That's where all of the participation should be happening, because there's no greater outcome for public participation. Study after study after study after study says if the parents are involved, the students do great. If the parents are not involved, the students do poorly. Period. 60% of student achievement is due to the involvement of the parent. 40% is due to the involvement of the teacher. And so as a public school board, as my public school board, what I cared about is, all right, well, what I want is for students to do well. What that means is, yeah, we should hire some good teachers. But what I really got to do is get the parents involved, to get them at my board meetings, get them to show up to PTO, and get them involved in volunteering in the school. And we have got to do a better job of making it so that our public officials are good serving public officials, are people who are showing up because they care. We have got to equip them with the laws and regulations that they need in order to drive that participation. So,
have you seen that, Deborah? Is that a part of the conversation at all? Which is, are we talking about both legislative change, but also it requires a cultural shift as well, right? I mean, you work in a part of Atlanta that often gets left out or is expected to have one singular representative speak for a diverse community of individuals. How do you get a message across clearly so that you are both hitting on some of the legislative barriers that exist for an elected official to do what it is that they're doing, but in addition, to make sure that it's actually representative of people and where they're at?
Right, so part of what we do is, it really is organized, strategizing, and mobilizing. It's not just about my voice being at City Hall or in these agencies. It's about getting the community voice there and making sure that they're educated on the issues. And a lot of times they have more information than we have, but getting them to the point that they're at the right meeting at the right time in the right ear, and pushing that level of power in order for it to shift. So there is a difference between elected officials and public servants. I'm sure you're a public servant, right? But most, and I would say in this region, are elected officials, and there's a distinct difference. When you have a heart to serve, that means whether you're elected or not, you'll serve, and you'll work in any capacity that you can. And so those are the folks that will come to your community meeting, whether there's an election year or not, because they know it's the right thing to do and they really care. But the majority of them, and I've been working in this city for 34 years, the majority of them, and I just dated myself, but I look good, right? But the problem is they won't show up unless they're forced or unless it's an obligation. And so what you have to do is to make sure that people are wherever they're going to be. So if their schedules are public, we suggest that they show up where those elected officials are going to be. Because and when you go to those city meetings, there's only a short amount of time for you to actually address the elected officials publicly. So if you don't get them in the office, if you can't get them in between the meetings, utilizing that time when there is open comment is very effective. One of the things, and I see Avery Jackson here, one of the things that they do quite well from the Turner Field Coalition is they come in mass. And so whether it's yielding your time to someone else to give them more time to talk, more time to explain their issues, that's important. It's the organizing part. And that happens outside of the camera, outside of government. That's at the community level at the meetings. That's understanding what the issues are, understanding who are the decision makers and how do you make those changes. And so it's a process. It's not just a one thing. And you have to push on all levels. It's not just you show up and you ask for something and you get it. Some of these campaigns are protracted campaigns over years with different strategies. So with this being an election year, this is, as I said, the sweet spot to try to get them to get what you need for your community.
So William, as a organization that serves as a watchdog on a lot of these issue areas, have you become cynical? Do you find that that watchdog agencies are just hammers looking for nails, or is there a there? Like, what have you seen in the community of watchdog agencies here across the state? Are they just cynics, or are they actually effective at holding government accountable?
Well, I think you have to be a bit of a cynic. You have to be motivated by that. That's what motivates me. I think maybe motivates others, is that you have to believe that they're not going to do the right thing unless you motivate others to get there. The question earlier was, do they care? And I would say every public official, every politician cares about preserving their power. Some want to preserve their power for good. Most want to preserve their power for self-preservation. And either way it goes, people can be very motivating in pushing them in the right direction in their attempt to preserve their power by showing up, by contacting them, by getting involved. And I think most can be pushed. I often say, in terms of ethics in government, campaign funding, things like that, that of those elected officials, 1% are truly corrupt. There are 1% out there doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, trying to line their own pockets. The opposite of that, 1% are the true standard bearers. They're the ones that stand up every time for what's right, and nothing can sway them. The most dangerous part is that other 99% that I refer to as the go along to get along gang. They're not going to stand up and fight for anything unless their power, their authority is being threatened. Most of the time, the biggest motivating factor will be their constituency. So they come around to do the right thing if they're hearing from enough people back home. And the most shocking thing that I've ever heard, and I use the example often, is actually from the Republican former majority leader of the House, in the State House, Ed Lindsey's up in Buckhead, ran for Congress a few years ago, gave up a seat and lost that congressional seat. But he used to talk about, in his district, which represented, a House district represents approximately 89,000 people. Of 89,000 people, he said that if he got 2 emails or phone calls about an issue, that got his attention. If he got 4, he thought, boy, there's a problem. If he got as many as 8, then that raised it to an immediate crisis that needed his attention right away. 8 people out of 89,000 in the district. So that shows you how low the bar is. I used to think that politicians had those inboxes with the pink message pad notes from all these calls that they got, and the emails backed up. Every email is black because they have checked and all that. It's really not the case. Now, surely they get a lot of spam robocalls or things that are generated automatically, and those things do help too. But hearing from constituents happens so rarely that they really do eat it up. Deborah kind of alluded to it earlier. They are excited if somebody comes to City Hall or the State House or anything like that. So when you kind of measure it, and now it's not true on every issue. You know, down at the legislature a few years ago, Sunday alcohol sales produced a lot of constituents. You know, from the Hope Scholarship, when that funding was being threatened, that produced a lot of communications. But a lot of the basic issues that we don't even think about, or we don't even see, or we don't even know come about, they hear nothing. They vote with whatever interest is pushing the hardest, that's lobbying the hardest, and we never really know about it.
And so who does a watchdog agency work for? Like, is this something that, you know, if I really care about something, does it operate kind of like if there's something specific I want you to watch, will you go watch it? Or do you watch specific things? Do you just watch House of Cards? Like, what is what is it that you're keeping your eye on?
My issues specifically are about open government, ethics, those type of things, because I believe first and foremost, if we don't.
So you're looking for ethics violations or somebody who's bending the rules. Is that kind of what you monitor?
Exactly. I've fundraised from private sources, so we have membership-based dues and things like that. So that's who pays me. But yeah, I mean, I start with the basics of ethics, openness, and that kind of thing. But then I try to get people involved into the issues that they care about, and saying, well, you know, your county commission or your city council or your school board will handle that issue the most. So if I can get you to start going to their meetings, to start monitoring them, to get others involved, you know, then a lot of times ethics issues come up.
I still don't fully understand. Who are you reporting back to? Like, who is that information being produced for? Is it the general public, like it's posted on the site?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, basically, I mean, I take any of the information I get and I try to get the media to cover it. I found that that's the most effective way to do anything. I can have my website, I can have my Facebook page. That's an incredibly limited reach. But most of the things that I do, I try to get media to cover. And usually can get, you know, most issues covered by someone. And that spotlight is usually what helps fix it.
And how good is media in the Metro Atlanta area? You're seeing a lot of, you know, if you are somebody in the media that says something or watches somebody a little bit too hard, you're front page news yourself, right?
Right.
So do we have an effective media to be able to get the type of information that you're talking about out effectively to the public? Like, are you utilizing the right vehicle?
We have a very effective media. They are losing their effectiveness because a lot of outlets are no longer employing investigative reporters, and they're going more and more with just the story-based reporters. So they're really stepping on their toes because we're not getting the in-depth kind of coverage we need. But still, most things, because we're in a very competitive market and because there are so many different outlets we can choose from, you can get most stories told if you do it effectively.
Got it. Deborah, has there ever been a story in the media that has helped inform your decision making or changed your mind on something versus what you've heard directly from individuals on the ground?
Maybe some of the reporters will do an in-depth story and then give us more information. So for instance, we get a lot of information about what they're doing on the west side with Arthur Blank and the west side communities. And we share that information with those on the south side to say, if they're spending $32 million on the west side, and that's important because there's a huge stadium next door, we also have those same issues on the other side of town. Let's use this and say, if it's good on that side of town, it also can be good on this side of town as well. So use that and hold them accountable for what they're doing for their own best interest. Of course, they're investing in the West End, the Vine City and English Avenue communities, because you have the Mercedes-Benz, which is crazy anyway, right next door, right across the street. And so, but over in Turner Field, because it's not in the sweet spot of the city right now, that those communities aren't getting the same type of shine, if you will, or the same kind of resources. So by chronicling from the media everything that they're doing on the west side, from the parks to the housing to the police force to all the investments, we're packaging that and saying that also should be done on the other side of town. So yes, in that case, we would say that the media, but we don't depend on the media for our advocacy. Ours is a little bit different than what William does. We work with communities. So our issues are really based on what they're feeling, what marginalized communities that, have been struggling for a long time, trying to make sure that the city is responsible and the county is responsible to them. So our constituent base are real people. Oftentimes, they're at work during the day. City council meetings are at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're a mother with 2 or 3 children working during the day, you can't afford to take off in the middle of the day to go to a city council meeting. And the way the council meeting is set up, it's crazy. You'll sit there for an hour and a half for proclamations, and they literally wait for the people to leave before they take care of the real business. And so it's a waiting game, and some meetings will go until 10 o'clock at night because they'll wait for controversial decisions to happen when there's no one there. So part of what, and often William and I might be the only ones there at the end of it, oftentimes you have to wait them out and really listen to what's going on because they're making deals in the back. But we're doing it with and on behalf of community, not just for ourselves.
So what could a government agency do to make that information and those decision-making processes more accessible for communities? And I do want to hear from you, Deborah. I want to hear from somebody who's on the ground. Okay, fine, the meetings are at the wrong time. There are other pieces that maybe some people just don't like going to boring meetings, right? I know my staff hates it, right? So what is the way to get a strong, what would a good community engagement channel look like between a government agency and communities they represent?
So one of the good things about what Maynard Jackson did in 1979 was set up the NPU system, the Neighborhood Planning Unit system. So the city is divided into 26 neighborhood planning units. And they're really supposed to be decision-making bodies for the community. So you'll have maybe 10 to 12 neighborhoods in one NPU. There's a leadership structure with that. However, if they've taken the planners out of the process and taken a budget out of the process, oftentimes you're talking about public citizens that are there investing their time and not really, one, have the resources that they need to get the information from the city that they need. But then two, the follow-up. When a developer comes to them and says that I'm going to put this wonderful thing, they often show those nice pretty charts and say, don't you like this? But until someone looks at the research and say, wait a minute, that's Mrs. Johnson's house. You can't do that. So part of that is peeling back the layers of what public policy is saying that they're going to do, absence of real community engagement. So it's about peeling that back, taking it back to the community, pushing for real public engagement meetings and saying you need to show up because when we looked at that map, it looks like it's on your house. And you need to go and you need to get your neighbors to go.
Why do you think people aren't showing up to NPU meetings? Because equally as defunct as a lot of the messaging is, a lot of these meetings are empty unless there's an emergent issue as well, correct?
Again, knowing that they used to be strong and they were systematically dismantled over the last 20, 30 years purposefully, knowing that they're taking community voice on purpose, that if every city has an agency or industry that runs that city, if we would say Atlanta is run by developers, would that be a common thing? So maybe in New Orleans it would be the restaurant associations, but here it's the developers. So if citizens can hold up a development process, then therefore you kind of make sure that system is weak. So you make sure that the NPU is not functional. So in some NPUs, they are very functional, but in others, they are not. Because you have heavy turnover, because you have citizen advocates that maybe don't have the resources or the training or the information that they need, they're in a bubble, and then they can decide on something and it still go to City Hall and get turned down. So but it takes constant citizen engagement, constant information, constant review of what's going on, and constant being ready to roll up your sleeves and get dirty with it.
So Clay, we live in a time where we have access and the ability to create some really interesting tools that could get information out to the public faster that we may get from a watchdog agency, or to get information back to government agencies from communities that are on the ground. Is this an opportunity for technology to play a role? And what are the limits of that opportunity in a city like Atlanta?
So, short answer, yes, obviously. Longer answer, if we don't let technology play a role, we're screwed. And the reason is because these phones that half the audience is looking at now are changing our customer service expectations, right? I carry a printing press in my pocket. What do you think Gutenberg would have to say about that, right? A global printing press in my pocket. And I can summon a limousine here to take me home if I want, right? With my thumb and some incantations, right? Some Harry Potter shit. I can send text. Did you see the iPhone X demo where they got Johnny Ive making a piece of poop animated to his face? Like, that is the pinnacle of human achievement right there, right? Like, it's amazing, these animojis, right? But government has failed first culturally and second procedurally to keep up with the times, right? So laws are contracts that we make with society, that the government makes with society, and all contracts, the best contracts, have great definitions, right? That's the first part of a contract, is the definitions. And I propose that we work very hard to change some of these definitions, right? The first definition I would like to change is the definition of the word public. I think the definition of the word public should now mean online. It should not mean in a building somewhere that you've got to drive a car to get to, and the reason why is because more people have phones with a data plan than they do cars. It is easier for someone to go someplace and view something or participate in something with their phone than it is with their car. And it's more affordable, and it's more accessible to do that.
And is there any concern of digital divide issues, like where you have, I think there are a lot of individuals that would say, yeah, that'd be great for this person, but not so great for this person.
What about the person without a car? Without access to reasonable transportation? Like, those issues have exist in every single. What about the people who have a job?
So
right?
It sounds like it's necessary, not sufficient. But how do you?
What I would say
city that
is,
struggles with digital divide, how do you deal with it?
I would bet that if you could get people to finalize my thoughts on that particular argument, I would bet that you could get more people turning up at a meeting through a phone or through some form of mobile device or desktop device or some kind of the internet than you could at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Than you could by saying then regularly turn up at an Atlanta City Council meeting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Further, the second definition I'd like to change would be public notice. It just makes me crazy. Public notices probably make me the most crazy of all things, because this is the thing that we create for the watchdogs and for everybody else to say, hey, I'm government, I'm about to do this real messed up thing, just thought I'd put it in the paper, so you could read about it. Where do Fulton County's public notices go? Does anybody know? The Fulton County Daily Report, newspaper published when? Twice a week, twice a month, every 2 weeks. So that's where the Fulton County, so all Fulton County schools, Fulton County government, everybody, all the Fulton County contracts, that's where their public notices go. Why couldn't they just, I don't know, go on a Facebook page, go on Twitter, go on a website somewhere, like put it somewhere where it's, why can't I sign up for text alerts to say, hey, send me notices of all contracts? It's cheaper than the giant government subsidy that basically all government agencies have to pay the Fulton County Daily Report. Yeah, you got to pay for it. Those are advertisements that these, elementary schools and whatever have to pay for, which is crazy. And it's more reliable, and it gets more to the public. So I don't know. This gets me really angry. So.
I see. Yeah. I mean, at the root of my question is basically there has been we have a new administration that's coming in. If they actually start moving toward
public means online,
toward public meeting online, what are some of the first steps that they could take, and would that be sufficient for the issues that we're facing in people being able to participate, or are you just cherry picking?
Here's what I was
actually going to be able to participate.
So if in my global wish list for the next administration, they wanted to take a baby step forward, right? It would be to allow me to sign up to get text alerts whenever a new agenda or new set of minutes were published by the city council, and to have someone who is not a sociopath write those agendas or minutes.
Fair enough.
By sociopath, I mean lawyer. But like...
and so William, do you think that we have are we in a situation where there's an opportunity to get better, or are we in trouble? Like, I don't guess, as somebody who's a citizen of this city, I see so many amazing things happening in this city. But if you do social work in this city, or you do anything that's community based, you realize that the change that's happening in the city is not necessarily for everyone. And so, in that happening, as somebody who monitors the ethics and the decision making that people are going through, are we in trouble right now? Are there decisions that are being made that are going to put us in hot water for the future? Or are these things that we can just fix in the next administration and we're good?
No, I think we're in big trouble. I think that
we're in big trouble.
We're in big trouble.
That's
between the digital divide and the lack of the traditional meetings. I think Clay has some really strong points. I think there still needs to be some balance between public officials being in a public space, conducting a meeting, but then still broadcasting that and allowing it to happen and allow participation to happen from elsewhere. But one example that shows me that we're further and further in trouble is down in Grant Park. They're putting in a parking deck on city-owned property. That required no public notice. That required no public hearings. The city got to decide, we're going to build a parking deck, and a lot of neighbors are upset because 100-year-old oak trees are coming down, the traffic pattern is not what they wanted, and things like that. But it really struck me as we're in trouble if government gets to decide, we're just going to build this, and we don't have to ask anybody. And when the city council person for that district was challenged with that, her response was, it's city property, we can do what we want. What? That's Carla Smith, the District 1 representative. That baffles my mind because that shows the mindset of a lot of public officials is this is ours. They're public. Public means we control it. You don't. Public does not mean it's not yours. That kind of mentality scares me.
So when that happens, so that's the constant dilemma, right? Is it almost feels like it happens, right? You're telling us there are ethical violations that occur. There are clearly loopholes for individuals who have maybe committed those ethical violations, or there are consequences that are so minute that it doesn't get to the general public. I mean, if there are so many ethical violations to the point where you're saying we're in big trouble, why are more elected officials not in jail, or on what is the consequence for an ethical violation? I just don't know.
Yeah,
because for me it was my mother slapped me in the face, right? Like what is the public mother slapping the city in the face equivalent?
You need to work on that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, fines are very low if you get fined for an ethical violation. It's not that big of a deal in terms of money. A lot of times there is no consequence associated with violating ethics. But the good news in it, the ruler, the slap the hand, is that it is an ethics violation. And no public official wants one of those. They don't want to be tagged with that.
But why not? I mean, if you get
Because they know their opponents will use it in the next election.
so they're using it, but they get reelected, correct?
Right. And the reason I use it as a tool is because of the embarrassment of it.
But
There's
then
not
what's the
enough-
use of a watchdog agency, right? If we're calling out stuff to call that no one actually bears a consequence for.
Because it does work. And I found.
Can you give me an example of why it
I'll give you several. And that's when I crossed the line of going from Common Cause, a national organization with state chapters that had to answer to a board, et cetera, I wanted a group that I had a little more control of and could make decisions. And the decision that I made was, instead of fighting for public policy and putting the bucket on my head and banging it against a brick wall, hoping that somebody would make a sensible decision, I decided what I've got to do is embarrass them. And I can embarrass them with ethics complaints. Now, at the end of the day, an ethics complaint, like I said, they won't pay a big fine, they won't go to jail, there's a lot of things that won't happen. But they get tagged with that stigma. And in Athens, Clarke County, there was a state representative named Keith Hurd who had over 80 reports of financial disclosure that he did not report. And so I filed ethics complaints on those, others did as well. And that became a drum that got deep where in the next election, he didn't survive. And that's about the only way we can do it. That's the way I found it.
We have currently people who are running for office who also have ethical violations. It doesn't seem to be a factor necessarily in the polls. What you're telling me is that all it really is a scarlet letter that exists, which I can't even publicly find because it's probably the Fulton County Daily Report. So I'm just confused as to why are watchdog, because what's happening is we're just discrediting the people who are publicizing the information at this point. You're seeing it nationally, you're seeing it locally. That if you criticize me or you put me down, I'll tell you what, I'll demean the value of that violation.
Right.
So what is the responsibility of watchdog agencies to actually be able to move the needle on there being consequence to ethical violations, as opposed to just being a sunlight agency that sheds light on something that no one's seeing?
To have that scarlet letter to put on the drum to keep beating, it's got to keep going. And at some point, the pendulum is going to get pushed so far in one direction that when it swings back, it's going to clear the house. Now, we've got some city council members who've stepped up to run for mayor and other positions. They've got those ethics violations. When we get a little closer to the election, their opponents are going to start pointing them out, and people will have a choice. But the good news for me is because so many are stepping up to run for something else, this city council in Atlanta is going to radically change because a majority of them are either running for something else or being challenged.
But how does it affect them when they're not running for office? Like if they are holding an elected, are there situations
Again,
where
going
people...
back to their preservation of power. And all of us are basically saying, you've got to get involved. Every one of you have got to get involved, and you got to go to the school board meeting, you got to go to the city council. I know it's not going to happen. Why aren't things happening? Why aren't people logging on? Why aren't they watching the live stream? It's because we're busy. But if every person that cares about an issue finds one government agency that they can take the time to follow on a regular basis, that one person can become an expert easily on that and really make for the change that we need. And I'll give you a brief example. It kind of sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, but I'm in the media in Atlanta a lot about these issues. So much so that reporters call me and they say, I want to talk to you about this story, but my editor, my producer says I can't because I've talked to you too many times. Can you give me another William Berry, somebody I can point to? Unfortunately, right now, I can't. I'm hoping to build a network of people that I could refer to. Yes, that's an ethical issue with the school board. Here's person A, B, and C you should call because they pay attention and they work on these issues. So that's what I'm hoping to do when it's not election time. Because right now we can only embarrass them if they care about election time. But if we get that little seed of folks and hopefully build something like that, then we can have more of an impact on the system, and it doesn't take a lot of people.
Deborah, are people, I feel like, to William's point, people are not only busy, but I think they're also tired of fighting for basic human and civil things that you believe should be true. What is the role of protest in this work? It can be just, depending on the person who you're talking to, it can be described from a different lens. It can be either a form of healing all the way to a form of disruption and it has been described by the people who are being protested in a variety of different ways as well. But what do you see as being the role of protest, and are we getting that role? Is there a right role for protest, or is that in the eye of the beholder?
Well, absolutely. So protest is a tool just like anything else. You have a toolbox full of advocacy, education, organizing, mobilizing, and then protest. So if you're just protesting and you just have the guy on the corner that doesn't matter what it is, he's just protesting, he's just the glad flag. But if you're protesting and it's in an organized way, if you're clear about what the issue is, you're in the realm of social justice, it's really beyond you, that whether it's police brutality or police profiling, or if it's, lack of community benefits, if you're clear about the message and you have an organized group that continues to beat the drum on that issue, then that's effective protest, when you can get elected officials to move in one direction or the other. We had a series of candidate forums over the last month. We had one on Thursday. We had 350 people there in the evening that stayed and listened to all of the elected officials. That asked questions, that were concerned. So although there's meeting fatigue, people are concerned about what's happening at the kitchen table. They're concerned about whether they're going to be able to live in this city. The city is pricing out many of the residents. I do believe there is a digital divide. And so although the tool of having electronics and making sure that you can get any information is absolutely necessary, particularly for the younger folks that, could pull out their phone and find anything. But for Ms. Johnson, that may not have a smartphone, still has a house phone. She's not going to be able to get that information that way. She needs to be able to pick up the phone and call someone and ask, when is my water going to be turned on? Or when is that city council meeting? And so we're losing a generation as the shift of electronics and technology is coming in. So we're losing that synergy of folks that really care and I see Edith Latimer over there, and you're in that generation, right? If I told you you had to text me to get me every time, you would be upset about that, right? You actually prefer it. Now you think. But there is a generational divide in terms of electronics, in terms of advocacy. Nothing beats showing up on the corner at City Hall and saying, hell no, we're not going to go, right? Nothing beats that. But you can't just have that. You have to then go back and do your research and find out when the next meeting is and when the policy is happening and when the budget is getting passed. You can't just go to one city council meeting and expect change. Every city council meeting is online. They're televised on Channel 26, but those decisions are made in between those meetings. So you have to go up to City Hall. You have to talk to your elected officials in between those meetings, so that when you're there, even when you think you have a deal with them, they will change it in the back room every single time. So if you're not in the room to watch it and then watch it again and then advocate and watch it again and push them again and then make sure when they don't do it, come back again and do it again, then oftentimes it's not done.
But
so the role of advocacy is there.
When is in this accountability measure, right, that we talked about getting data to be clear about what's what. We've talked about watchdog agencies. We've talked about technology. At a certain point, though, sometimes government agencies just make decisions regardless of what the data shows us and regardless of what people have said they want. We have clear examples, particularly around development, where people have said, I would like this particular thing to happen. They said it through your NPU meeting, they said it through the forums that were set up, the community meetings, all those things. But when the development plan actually comes back, it looks nothing like what people had had said it was supposed to be. So what then, people start to say, okay, well, I'll go through the process, I'll use my time at the meeting, and I'll say what it is that I need to say, and hopefully be heard. And then when that plan is supposed to go back to those agencies that have been, or those entities that are set up, cities have the ability to use sovereign immunity to say, I can make the call at the end of the day, right? So at a certain point, where does the role of protest come in? Are we legitimized to just actually be like, no, this city is building for us without us, and therefore is not for us? Like, what is that? We have, I think young people are really pissed off right now, right? And it feels helpless because these folks are gonna make decisions regardless. So what do we do?
So we keep getting up and keep trying. That's what we do. We don't stop. Just because they don't do the right thing doesn't mean that we don't do the right thing. We have to keep going at it. When we looked at the Beltline, we started the Beltline back in 2004. We pushed them on affordable housing. They only agreed to 46,000 units, 4,600 units. It didn't happen. 12 years later, someone finally got fired for that. That's after the third or fourth person in that job for the Beltline. So at some point, someone's going to say, wait a minute, this is what you said you would do. You didn't do it. Consequences have to be paid. However, when you have administration shifts, when you have leadership shifts, unless there's someone and some people, organizations watching the ball every step of the way and saying, wait a minute, I remember that document back in 2005, and this is what they said they were going to do, and this is the community benefits plan that was passed, and they didn't do it. And so we're going to bring this up and keep bringing it up and keep bringing it up and keep bringing it up. So yeah, there's meeting fatigue, there's protest fatigue, but if you step away from the process and say, I'm not going to participate because the game is unfair, if you say to the people, you know what, government doesn't care, don't bother, then people will continue to be siphoned out of these cities, that the cities will no longer be for the community, and we'll be a lost society.
It just feels like it's already happening, with or without that, right? So
Rarely am I the least cynical person on the panel. I'm not sure what's happening. But government is for, by, and of people. All government in the United States is for, by, and of people. And that means as people, we have a responsibility to show up and say, these guys are going to disagree with me, and roll their eyes. Let's watch them. Let's see. They'll roll their eyes. Our responsibility is first to show up and say, how can I help? It is not that let me see. Did you roll your eye? Did she roll her eye? So my belief though, is that if we walk in to a government, if people walk in to any branch of government and say, how can I help get you locked up? That's just not a very good sales proposition. That it's not, as soon as you say, I'm a watchdog, as soon as you say, I'm here to organize a protest, I'm here to help get you locked up. If someone showed up to my work and did that, I would be like, I'm here to get some McDonald's. Like, I'm here to leave. I'm here to not listen to you. I'm here to not spend any time with you. I don't want to spend any time hearing your voice, because what you want to do is get me locked up. And what I want to do to people who want to get me locked up is not talk to them, is to shut down. And so I think that if we truly believe that government can be of, by, and for people, then sure, watchdogging has a place. Watchdogging is useful. But step one has got to be, how can I help? Is to be of service, is to be a public servant. And that's not necessarily playing the gotcha game that we get into with watchdogging to say, oh man, I got him on this, this one regulatory ethics complaint, and now I'm going to brand that person with a scarlet letter. No. Is that person of service? Are they being of service? can they, did they know that they were, in this, you have to know that Georgia ethics law takes a full-time job just to follow, right? The fact that every elementary school is basically paying an attorney two teacher salaries just to keep up with Georgia ethics laws is insane, right? But if we had people showing up and saying, hey, how can I help? I think all of our public bodies would do a lot better at serving their community rather than, hey, how can I help get you
But
up?
truly outside of that, hypothetically, you can understand why,
Sure.
why that is.
But no one does. I don't think there are any laws of. I looked at it right when I got on stage. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but like I don't believe that there are any like laws of like great job being ethical on your website, right? I will clarify. On your website now, are you applauding anybody for being ethical and following ethics laws?
Yeah.
Yes. Who's doing a good job?
The City Council. The Kennesaw City Council was praised for actually giving up their benefits. The City Council said, we're part-time people, we're giving up our health and our 401k plans because we don't deserve them, other city workers do in terms of the budget process. I actually praised Mayor Reed for his handling of the Black Lives Matter issue, and it really blew up in Atlanta. I went on camera for Fox 5 and praised him. So, you can look it up. You can look it up.
Black Lives Matter?
For his handling of the protests of the issue. Yes. For his handling of the protests of the issue. So, yeah, I mean, there are times to stand up and praise when you agree with someone doing it. Unfortunately, when you come to the ethics law and things like that, you're pointing out, there hasn't been a lot of times where you can stand up and praise somebody. I often did awards where we designated ethics champions and things like that. So there are some. But yes, in a world that you talked about, and I did roll my eyes because if everybody showed up and said, how can I help? We wouldn't have those problems. But I decided when I formed my group that I was going to wear the black hat. I was going to be the guy they wouldn't talk to. I was going to be the guy that would come up and say, not that I'm going to lock you up, but that we are going to call you out when you step out of line. And I found the two go hand in hand. Those who tend to fight against transparency are the ones that are committing ethics violations.
And so
that's my role in it. I applaud and say it's necessary for more people to push forth public policy and to wear the white hat and to constantly work with them and praise them and tell them that they're doing good and placate to their egos. That needs to be done. I just decided that that wasn't my best role. My best role is wearing the black hat.
Yeah, I think what we're, I want to open it up for questions as well. I think that I don't feel good about this. And not that it's your collective responsibility to make me feel good about this, but I'm worried as a citizen that we're so caught in this. It doesn't feel like we actually are hitting at the source of the problem, right? It feels like each and every, whether it's a watchdog agency or a technology fix or encouraging people to show up to meetings. I know it's a multifaceted approach that's necessary, but I think that people's trust could not be at a lower level at this point of government. And it's getting to the point where it's not a game anymore. We're not going to wait for the next website to show us that this is beautifully written, that there is a procurement opportunity. Because systemically the problem is that if I'm a person of color, I will never get that procurement opportunity in the first place. And so there's a huge fear, I think, of individuals in this city that this city is not only not being held accountable, but that there's no solution or consequence when you do something wrong in this city. So how do we, as citizens of this city, or people who live here, residents of this city, how do we actually hold the next, what is the role of us to hold the next administration accountable? What are tangible things beyond what has been tried and not true that we can do that may disrupt the way that we're currently thinking about this particular problem?
So one, we need to look at this as a hiring process. There is a job description of what the mayor and the city council is supposed to do. If you look at it, yeah, so if you look at it as a job interview, who do you want to represent you? Their job is to represent their communities. Oftentimes they do not. It's very easy to craft a report card of what they have done or have not done. Hold them accountable by what they said they were going to do last time and what they didn't do, or what they did do, and reward them if they did do what they said they were going to do. But oftentimes, I just want to be clear, we're not necessarily a watchdog organization. We hold people accountable because we care about the people we work with. We're trying to make sure they get the things that their government promised them that did not deliver, which is very different. We're not in the I got you game. We're in the you said you would do this is your job, and you haven't done it.
And so what do you do when they respond to you of, yeah, that's just kind of the way it goes sometimes?
They really don't respond that way.
Well, they'll say it in more
they
political
give lip service, and then they vote another way. And so we have to constantly hold them accountable when they do that, right? And so most of the candidates came to our candidate forum because if they didn't, they were going to be called out for not coming, for not showing up, because we crafted it in a way that it was for residents, historic incumbent residents that have been left out of these processes in these neighborhoods. So they're holding you accountable. We want to hear from you. These are the issues that we're talking about. We're talking about gentrification, displacement, property taxes, broken promises, broken school systems. So your constituents are upset about this. These are their questions. Come and answer the questions from the folks. So it's a different kind of spin than I think either, and we're colleagues in another way. I appreciate what William does because it actually helps me to say, oh, Michael Bond has how many violations? So then when we're in a public space, we can then say, this is the report card. This is what this person has been doing. Or whether it's someone else, Kasim Reed or anyone else, we can say that. But I do have to talk to you about the Black Lives Matter thing because I'm not sure that went well. But I guess the point is, we all have a role to play, and unless we get involved, the fact that you all are here on a Monday night and it's 80 degrees outside, I mean, really, it's really good that you're here. But the next step needs to be, you need to get involved with what's going on, get people registered to vote. They're purging people left and right. They're shifting the city. The city is changing right before our eyes, and people are being left out. There is no homeless plan for this city.
And so what is stand up? What is Georgia Stand Up willing to do or going to do? And not that it's your responsibility to do everything, right? You all do a lot. But if those candidates who have now sat up on a stage have made commitments to the platform that you've presented to them, either metaphorical or literal, and if that is violated over the course of the next 4 years, what is Georgia Stand Up's role in holding that elected official accountable? What do you do if that happens?
So part of it is exposing it, but also it's the advocacy of going back and saying, this is what you promised. We videotape them when they make these commitments.
But
they sign.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
We videotape them, we sign it, we have them sign a platform, but also it's not just after the election, that's just the beginning. We're gonna hold them accountable, whoever gets elected. So whether it's an ABC campaign and vote all the incumbents out, which is an option, or whether it's, these are progressive candidates that we think you should look at. We're a 501c3, so we don't take a position on candidates. However, we have friends that do, and so making sure that they understand that these are the things that they have not done or have done well and they should be rewarded is important.
Not to keep pressing you on this, but I want to get a sense of if it's one thing to say, is it just the threat of losing an election that is that the best way to hold someone accountable? Is
No,
we will
it's-
then support, or we will
It's a
let the
number of
public know?
things. So one, so you asked the question earlier about, are you coming up there and saying, how can we help you? We write policy and give them the policy.
So that's what I wanted to get out of it.
So they don't have to come up with all these great ideas on their own. You can Google any great policy in any other city but this one and say, hey, Portland did this, Seattle did this, Denver did this, Detroit did this. This is some best practice modeling of legislations. How about doing this in the city of Atlanta? So giving them viable options and things that they can hang their hat on, because most of the time, elected officials, you think that they have studied to be this public servant, but they're not. They're driven by their own, whatever they needed to do to offer themselves as an elected official. It's our job to make them smarter. It's our job to make them work for us. So it's giving them good policy recommendations. It's holding them accountable. It's staying engaged in the process and not being so cynical that you don't show up anymore, because that they win if you don't show up. Every time you show up, that means that somebody's standing there. Just like William said, those 1 or 2 letters, those emails, they make a difference. If 50 people come to City Hall, we wear orange. 50 people, when they see those orange shirts at City Hall, they're like, okay, here's stand up, what do they want, right? Because they know at this point that we're coming for a progressive agenda, for a social justice agenda, for the people that have been left behind.
I think what the writing of policy is it's very interesting. William, last question for you, from me, is what does innovation look like in the sector that you work in? Because that information is not getting to me as somebody who follows this stuff regularly until it becomes a campaign tactic. So really it's fueling campaigns to utilize that information. If you had all the public beneficiary money in the world, what would the ideal watchdog agency look like and prioritize over the course of the next 3 years?
It's a hard question for me to answer, because in terms of innovation, I don't know what the answer is. I know there needs to be an answer that leads to more engagement. At the end of the day, the engagement piece is the most important factor. Deborah kind of alluded to it earlier, I've said it too many times. The biggest decisions are made in empty rooms. And they're not the back rooms where the wheeling and dealing is going on, they're the public spaces, they're the city council chamber, where when the vote comes down, everybody's left, and they're sitting up there thinking, that means no one cares. It doesn't matter if you had a protest 2 days ago, it doesn't matter, it does matter, but it doesn't as much as when it comes down to them casting their vote, when there's an empty room, that's when the bad policy happens. So what the innovation answer is, I don't know, but it's got to be.
I just want to see more effective use of agencies that are, or organizations that are utilizing capital to be able to fuel an agenda to bring transparency to something. The fact that those agencies exist, and you're not the only organization per se that brings attention to these types of issues, but how do we bring that back to, if it's just a marketing issue, that's one thing, but it sounds like it just doesn't matter.
I was nodding my head a lot when Clay was speaking earlier about the text alerts. There needs to be apps, there needs to be things that help with that engagement, that break it down, allow me, almost like a dating site, to set preferences of who I would like to see or get information from, so that I can further.
That's troubling hearing from a watchdog agency that you want to see more apps and text. For me, I want to see more consequence to the work that you're doing.
He wants to see more engagement, and the way that he wants to see more engagement, and the way that he's going to get more engagement is by making it so that the meetings and public spaces are more accessible to people. And, we probably just disagree on the digital divide thing. I'm just going to bring it up one more time. The digital divide is not as great in the city of Atlanta as the transportation divide is, right? And so, the answer is yes, we should absolutely invest in all that we can, but if we're setting priorities, just want to point out again, there are more people with phones than there are with cars, and the city of Atlanta is a really big place.
So Clay, last question for you is around, before you started this panel, you said what we're missing is actually a lot more hope, that we've lost hope, that everybody is losing that. And how do we bring hope back to to communities that feel like, you know, that they are just not being heard?
Well, you know, when I say you show up and you say, how can I help, right? We need to not limit that to government, right? And we need to understand that, I mean, what I found is, you know, people would come to me at the public charter school I was chair of, and come to me and say, well, you know, my kid's falling behind and blah, 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 blah. What I found was the easiest way to do it is to help that parent find someone to help tutor them, who wasn't a teacher, who was just a member of our community, usually another kid that was in a, you know, higher grade, that kind of thing. We need to reignite volunteer service, especially in the city, in a way that I think hasn't been spoken to before, because I think that we're looking to government to solve some societal problems. The anonymity problem, the phone problem. I used to go to Manuel's Tavern fairly regularly back in the early aughts, and it was a good time because you could show up there. They got no jukebox playing, and usually the TVs don't have any sound unless it's like a election night. I try not to say that word, election, anymore. But I always used to go there because you could get in a conversation with somebody. You just talk to a stranger and become friends with them. And now you go there, and at the bar, it's just blue screen after blue screen after blue screen after blue screen after blue screen. We're becoming, I think technology is having some, you know, as pro phone and pro getting your news and all that stuff off your phone as I am, I also think that it's having some implications on how we interact with each other and how we interact with our neighbors and what we think service means to one another and what we think community participation means that we haven't really thought through quite yet. And so showing up and saying, looking someone in the eye and saying, how can I help? Whether that be in City Hall or whether that be your neighbor, to me is how you make hope. Every single person in this room is a hope generation machine. But if you're staring at your phone and looking at, you know, getting in a Facebook debate about Justin Bieber's hair, which I did today, then you're not doing yourself or your community any favors.
So we're going to open it up for questions. If you could just say your name. I'm going to get you in just a second. If you could say your name, know that we have a thing there, so if you could speak up, that would be awesome, just so you can be heard. And then just questions end with question marks. So, yes, in the back, if you could stand.
Okay, so I just have to be really loud, basically?
If you're able to stand, that would be well. If you're not, that's okay. Yeah.
Hello, first off, thank you so much. I've learned quite a bit. So I think a little differently. I'm a tech geek. So I'm more curious about local hacktivism. So hacktivism is when someone makes a movement online, and it can be something as big as denial of service. So a lot of people visit, see website crashes, to something as simple as like on Facebook, and they just like rant on a certain action or something that happened. So I'm curious if there's ever been any evidence or if there's a rise of local hacktivism.
Could you direct your question to a specific individual on the panel?
I'm actually interested in hearing it from all three just because I can tell that they often respect this. But I know Clay's probably most informed.
So Clay, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question, what's her name?
Marissa.
Urissa. Urissa's question was, what's going on with is there a rise of local activism in Atlanta? Luigi Montanez runs Code for Atlanta, and they're picking up steam in sort of civic tech here in Atlanta. I think it's worthwhile to check them out. He, like me, is a former Sunlight alum. I think when it comes to, hacktivism, there are, various ways that you can sort of look at this stuff. To me, the most appealing is finding a niche of government that needs repair or needs modernization, and developing a specialty around that, maybe even volunteering for that sector, and then using your skills to improve that sector as a whole. So, as an example for me, what I'm doing is I spent 3 years as a chairman of a public charter school board, and found that most of my time was not spent in service to children. That most of my time was spent in service to state regulatory agencies, and managing documents and shuffling documents around. And that's a problem that can be solved with technology. So now my next startup is really going to be about school board management software, and making it easy for schools to both stay in compliance with what states want, but also do what we were talking about up here, which is send out notices of public meetings and send out agendas and send out minutes, and making it easier for people to track votes and that kind of thing, and hopefully even nudge people in the right way of not being sociopathic when they write their minutes down. That'll be a little bit more difficult, I agree. But I think that just as an aside, I think that there's a wide swath of opportunity in the sector, especially in Atlanta, because you have so many various government agencies with so many various fingers and places. And I would encourage you to show up to a Code for Atlanta meeting, and I would encourage you to also, again, show up to a place, volunteer at it, learn about what their problems are, and then work towards it.
But my question was more in regards to, for instance, in the ethics watchdog. Has there been evidence of someone literally trying to hacktivism in the traditional sense of bringing down their website because they were mad about something they said? So government accountability. But I want to.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of at the local level, but yeah, the Secretary of State's office with the voting equipment was a case. There was an example. I struggle to think of another example, but I don't think that they're often brought to our attention. So, therein lies another problem that's, we know it's probably happening, but we're not hearing about it. So, thanks for adding to my watchdog list.
Yes, please.
So I'm trying to think of who I would address this to. But I guess, Clay, I'll address it to you. So my question is about, first, thank you everyone, this is great. My name's Charity, I'm not in order right now. But my question is, how would you advise community leaders or community organizers or citizens in general to have the how can I help conversation with issues that are tied to systemic oppression or systemic degradation of communities, like redlining in Atlanta, the list goes on and on. I'm thinking about voter suppression in Atlanta. And I guess on top of that question, with systemic issues like that, usually the person in office is just another face, is just another name taking up another bill or taking up another action. It's tied to a whole bunch of people and a very difficult, disgusting history that a lot of people don't even learn about until they get into college or come to something like this. So how do you have the how can I help question, and is that really where to start?
So there's a lot to unpack there, right? And it's a very big and very broad question of how do you have a how can I help conversation in an area with such systemic oppression, right? I don't have a straight answer I can give you, other than to say, yeah, we have to be of service to each other first. We have to, the way that, I'm going to sound vapid and I apologize, but the way that I know to lift, it's not like I've lifted thousands of people out of depression or anything like that, but it seems to me a better strategy is to make hope. I want to go back to the make hope kind of thing. So maybe it's not the approach to show up to City Hall in a place that is being systemically racist or oppressive or whatever, and say, how can I help? Because that doesn't make a lot of sense. But what I do know is making sure you got your targets right is fairly vital. Like, for instance, with voter suppression, right? Most voter suppression in Atlanta is really happening at the state, right? Most of the things that I've been complaining about when it comes to local laws have really come from the state, like the Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Act. Those are state laws. Almost everything that's going wrong with schools right now is happening at the state level, not even at the APS level. There's systemic problems that are coming from the state that even the state doesn't know about. Like, for instance, the thing that's driving me crazy right now is we have these Georgia milestones, and I've gone to the State Department of Education and I've said, how do you add those up? How do you come up with the names of the scores, or the numbers of the scores? And they say, well, the vendor does that. I said, well, how does a vendor do that? And they said, I don't know, it's a vendor problem. I said, so what you're telling me is that you've got some software that the vendor uses to add up the scores of all the children that go to public school in the state, and you don't know how it's added up for every school in the state of Georgia. You don't know how you're coming up with the numbers for every school in the state of Georgia. You don't know exactly, you can't audit that. No, the vendor can't. So, like, how do you know that you're not telling a generation of girls that have hyphenated last names that they're bad at math because of a bug in a SQL database? How do you know that? Well, never really thought about it. I guess I'll ask our vendor. And I know that's
I think the root of the question is a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah.
So I think, like, Deborah, I'd actually like to hear, given the work of Georgia Stand Up, the fact that you work in communities that have, through data and through anecdote, been systemically and disproportionately given attention to. How do you, if you were charged with telling someone, hey, you should tell folks, how can I help? How do you think folks would respond to that, and how would you encourage them to take that type of
Well, I think that's a good question in terms of how can I help, but maybe not asking government, maybe asking community leaders and community groups that are working on these issues, how can you be of help? Because I can see ways you can be of help. We need to, be able to ask the white guy, what do we need to do to get this bill passed? I mean, can you go into the developer room? Maybe they won't know who you are, and maybe you can get the information and bring it back to us. That would be helpful to us, because they can see us coming, right? Okay, hey, get the sheet. So, I mean, we really need help in other ways. I mean, information, research, technology, the information that you can pull up as a student or as a young person, we need that data. We need that information. But the question is, for me, is not really how you can help government. It's really how can your government help you. This city, the social mobility issues in the city are so stark. And I think the number is that only 4% of people born in poverty will actually ever get out of poverty, but then will never rise above to the middle class and upper middle class. So it's really, really bad. The income levels of middle class Black residents is somewhere between $29,000 and $40,000, and that's considered middle class in some areas, higher in others, versus in other areas it's $84,000 a year versus the $24,000. So it's a tale of two cities, it's a tale of two classes. We would be remiss if we ended this conversation without talking about race, because it's race, class, economics, all go hand in hand. It's green as well. This city is going through a process of redefining itself and reshaping itself for the generation to come and the people we want to attract to the city, but we're missing those that have laid the foundation for generations in this city. We don't need them anymore, so they're throwing them away. They don't think they need them anymore. We tear down our history every step of the way. We celebrate Martin Luther King, but we don't live the values of a Martin Luther King. We celebrate the civil rights movement on murals and in museums, but we don't live the principles at City Hall. So living those values is really what we could do versus just honoring the building that is being held. They say the #1 tourist location is Auburn Avenue just to go look at a gravesite, right? But are we living those principles when we leave that gravesite? When we go over to the Coca-Cola property that has the Center for Civil and Human Rights and the Coca-Cola Museum and the aquarium, all right there as a tourist destination, but we don't live the values after that. When this is the #1 place for Black tourists to come for our family reunions and our convention, everyone all over the country wants to come to Atlanta because they heard about this Black Mecca. But the people under the trees that are living beneath poverty, the homeless folks, those are policy issues that are made at City Hall that have been made by Black elected officials conspiring with businessmen for centuries, for years. They call it the Atlanta way. So what we like to say is there needs to be a new Atlanta way where we put the people first and that we live these values that we say that we honor by saying Martin Luther King came from Atlanta. Most of those civil rights wins happened in other places. They would come to Atlanta to strategize and organize and get rest, and then they would go fight those battles somewhere else. We need to fight these battles right here. Every single day that you get up in Atlanta, there's a disparity issue happening. There's a homeless person, there's someone losing their jobs. We have people, eminent domain, and that's another issue I want to talk to you about, because we're using eminent domain, taking people's homes on the guise that they're flooding or that there's some environmental concerns, when really it's a development project that's coming and they want to bring a new population. So we have to sometimes wipe our neighborhoods clean, and we wait 10 years after we destroy public housing, and then we build condos. Because hopefully those people will forget that those were housing projects that were there before. So there are ways in which you can get active, and you can help government and say, this is the policy that you should put in place. Inclusionary zoning, affordable housing, rent control, these kind of community benefits. Those are the things that we can do to help. And get involved, get registered to vote. People are being purged from these polls. The numbers are shifting dramatically. But if we don't get involved, like really get involved, this city will not be recognizable 5 years from now. And we'll say, this is what it used to be.
Thank you. Deborah.
So I'll stand up. So I think Deborah used to get a really good job of touching on some things I was going to actually bring up. But two questions. So one, I think what we're talking about accountability, but we have to define what do we hold people accountable to, right? When we think about a local government or we think about government bureaucratic institutions where communities, the only experience these communities have with these government institutions is one of discrimination, one of exploitation, one of oppression. How do we begin to frame accountability for those communities? How do you begin to expect someone to show up to a city council meeting when the only ancestry, the only descendant, the only legacy they know is one where the government exploits them, right? And that's very much here in Atlanta. And then two is who is holding, we're talking about accountability, we're talking about local government, who is holding accountable this very public and private sector that Atlanta seems to be so committed to? Because I think that just as much as there's a policy conversation you can have with elected officials, there's the way that some of these nonprofits and these service providers navigate is one that exploits in these communities of their resources and their brain trust to be able to legitimize their budgets when they are not actually leaving an impact in the communities they're working in. So it's I think these are two very critical questions that have to be answered. And I think we also you don't have to talk about young people. Young people can talk for themselves, especially when we're talking about accountability. Like when we're in Atlanta, when people are in the streets, we come to these events and we know each other because we've been in the streets together multiple times because of accountability. So I think we just have to be more critical about all the conversations we're having accountability, and we cannot be afraid to say black and be afraid to talk about race in a city like Atlanta that is still living off of white supremacist infrastructure.
Do you have a specific question for one of the panelists?
Yeah, I had two. So I'll go with the first one.
Okay.
Was when we're talking about accountability, what are we holding the local government accountable to? Are we talking about a constitution that was written and we know that there are things that don't benefit black communities, or what are we talking about holding local government accountable to? And then maybe Rohit, maybe you can answer the second one, is who's holding accountable nonprofits that are service providers or working with community but not necessarily leaving impact in the community that they're working with.
So the first is who there should be held accountable to.
Or what they're holding accountable to. We're saying accountability, but what is the standard?
Well, first of all, in Georgia, standards are very low. Oftentimes, the politicians talk about how, we show up on the FBI list as one of the states with the fewest amount of public officials who get arrested or prosecuted, et cetera. And it's because our laws are so low that you can't break a law if one doesn't exist. So holding them accountable to the very few things that I can, ethics issues and things like that, is the route that I chose. But we do need to get it back to the point where first they're accountable to their constituency base. And secondly, we're working on raising the bar of standards of accountability, because in Georgia, they're at the rock bottom. Second question? I don't know.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
so
think
changing that standard.
So the second question, and correct me if I'm not hitting it right, who holds both the private sector and also nonprofit organizations that are doing, whether they're service providers or that are working in community, but not necessarily making impact in the communities that they're saying that they're going to serve, who holds them accountable? I think the truth is that if you don't receive a 501c3 in this country based upon your impact, and I think that's a huge problem, that you can receive tax deductibility based upon absolutely nothing other than the ability to fill out a form and report on that form on an annual basis. I think a great way to actually look at where dollars are being spent in the public sector is to look at the 990 forms of both foundations and nonprofits, because they have to publicly say where the dollars they receive are actually being allocated. There is not really a watchdog for nonprofit organizations. You really can get away with a lot without having to make public disclosure to anyone but your funder. But people don't look at the 990 enough. It actually is a pretty rigorous form that organizations have to fill out. GuideStar.org makes that.
You got to pay for that now. It's ProPublica.org. It's
ProPublica. So I just used GuideStar today. So
my question was less about necessarily government infrastructure for managing the bureaucracy of a nonprofit, and more of culturally, right? So communities in Atlanta Atlanta is known for the private-public partnership.
Yes.
So a lot of these communities are dependent on nonprofits, right?
Yes.
And so who is holding them accountable culturally in communities in the way that they show up, in the way that, they write grants on behalf of, community, but don't necessarily shift the power dynamics in the community and working for over multiple years.
So the individuals who actually control those purse strings, you need more people of color actually in leadership positions in foundations. If you actually look inside foundations who are giving away the majority of the capital, they'll usually be male and white. And also you have a lot of corporate foundations here that give away capital. So if you're trying to fill out a grant for an institution that doesn't look like you, but is saying that it's trying to serve you, I think that that's really, really something that we need to be shedding light on. I think we need more people of color to actually enter into those leadership positions because most people who are doing community-based work from the foundation, from the perspective of a foundation, actually haven't lived the issues that they're solving against. It's more they're controlling the capital for another individual to distribute that back out to communities. So I think some of it is ignorance, some of it is that that information is not readily available. A lot of it is that the process is purposely made to be harder to not have to deal with challenging circumstances and instead to turn it into an opportunity for happy stories. And I think the nonprofit sector and the way that capital is distributed in the public sector, I think, is severely broken.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a whole page of stuff that I want to
Okay.
but I'm just going to try to.
Well, I know we had a lot of hands, so go ahead. Yes.
One of the things that I would like to say to the young people, especially as a former chair of the NPU and the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board, established my own nonprofit and have done work with the U.S. Department of Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education Civil Rights Division. I come to the table with a holistic approach to how I deal with Atlanta, and I have had to deal with Atlanta for the last 40 years. So my concern is that all of these things that you're talking about are excellent, but I don't think it's enough. And I think that when you get to a point where you reach loggerheads with the city government, you need to step out away from city government. And for young people, you need to know what's in the Constitution. You need to know what's in the state constitution. You need to know what is in the public policy for the city of Atlanta. And you definitely need to know what is in the charter. Because in most cases, what they are doing with the NPU system, what they're doing to reorganize, all the things that they are doing, even I think Matthew Cardinelli had to take it to court because of the transparency issue, they are violating on everything. And so just to be able to take them to court to get a decision on whether or not they have actually followed what exists either in the state, the federal, or the local is a challenge for the community. But it gets the job done, even if you have to go forward and all the way to the Supreme Court. Maybe that's what it's going to take, because they don't care. I mean, the community benefit agreement, you know, they don't negotiate in good faith. They negotiate today, next week they might change it, they get it in the back room, they change it, and nobody knows what they're doing until they have their vote on it. And oftentimes you don't know that because they don't publicize what they've done.
Could I have you direct a question to
So my question is, what are the organizations doing to make sure that, number one, the people are educated and knowledgeable about what the law says about development and selling of public property and all of that? And what are you all doing to help the community to take these issues beyond City Hall?
Well, as a graduate of our leadership development program, Ms. Latipo, and you're now running for office, so we're trying to, we do leadership development, policy, education, activism, community benefits. We do what we can as a small nonprofit in the South. When we look around the rest of the country, some of the progressive policies that we would love to pass here, our own elected officials push back against it. And as William said, they don't want good public policy here because it holds them to a higher level. There's something with this legacy of slavery and legacy of being in the South that, you know, it's okay to keep people down. The reason why we're allowing corporations to come here hand over fist is because we're saying that the wages are low. That's a policy issue. If we push for a minimum wage that is above $15 an hour, the economy will shift. So what we're doing is trying to educate as much as possible in the way in which we can and hold people accountable. But it's a tough job. We need more organizations that are working together and working in coalitions so that we can fight on these things together.
Well, I would just say that I have not, that I will help uncover any wrongdoing in efforts like that, but there's nothing specifically that I've worked on to do that, just because my focus remains pretty narrow in terms of ethics, open government, and things like that.
I'm going to get a few more questions that we got.
Wait,
Yeah.
I'm suing the state of Georgia. The official code of the state of Georgia annotated is actually copyrighted by a company called LexisNexis, and you have to pay to get access to that code. So I'm involved in a lawsuit and I'm the technical witness to try and, well, what we did, we published it, and broke the law to publish it, and actually put it out on a bunch of, put the code on a bunch of USB drives and mailed it to every state legislator and dared them to sue us, and they did. So we've been involved in court cases to do that. I just wanted a second to brag about that because it was cool.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Rachel Wilson. Again, what everyone said, thank you very much for sharing your information. It's been helpful. My question is about the accountability and consequences. So, as a person, I live in the Greekers, I'm not in the city of the but we have county house. So I really want to understand, so if there are groups like NPUs, how do we say there's this issue with this policy, and I want in that form be able to create some kind of consequence for that. If this person doesn't do X, and there's this metric that they're supposed to do at the end of the year, then we can enlist either credit back to the community or reduce the amount of their budget or something that would cause them to not be able to continue on doing stupid shit. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. The consequences, less on the scarlet letters, politicians using it as a way to get their promotional power. But how are we able to assist and be able to say, I want to list certain consequences for not doing something versus just statement.
Who's your question for? Director.
Deborah and
We'll just have Deborah answer. Sorry, we just have a few others.
Oh, yeah.
Make sure folks can get out on time.
Well, thank you. And the short answer is there is no consequence. How do we get it? We've got to get engaged. We've got to get different people elected that are willing to create a system where consequences can be enforced. So much of what I do, as I said, there is no consequence to it. You just got to say that it's done wrong and hope that you're electing better people. I mean, there are examples in the state legislature where the number of people fighting for my issue, ethics reform, is actually growing. And they're on both sides of the aisle. And so, as much doom and gloom as there is, it's getting better. But currently, I don't know of a way where it's kind of, and I have to apologize because I have a hard stop at childcare at 9 o'clock and we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to have to step out. But I appreciate you all having me and I appreciate the questions that were asked.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
And I would say, in terms of the community benefits movement, there's something called clawbacks. So that if a developer is given a tax break or an incentive, that if they don't fulfill what they said that they would do, that we should be able to claw back that money, claw it back. But that's the first thing that they strip out of any community benefit agreement here because they don't want to have to claw it back. But you want to make sure that every time you push for a development project or every time the community pushes for a development project that you ask the question, what happens if it's not done? What happens to the elected official? What happens to the development project? So whether it's affordable housing, beyond someone getting fired, I think they should double the amount of affordable housing that needs to be required and that they should pay for that in another way. So we have to come up with some unique strategies, but we have to have the will, not only of the people, but of the elected officials. And that's why this is the sweet spot on these elections, is to say that we need to hold you accountable. This is our money. Tax dollars is our money. That's just our money that they're playing with. This is our money that they're giving to the developers. So we don't claim that as our money and hold it as if it's our purse and say, just like if you try to take grandma's purse, beat you over the head with the purse, we can't let it go. We have to keep saying, you know, but what about? But what about the affordable housing? But what about the things that you said you were going to do? What about the community benefits? You have to keep, you know, keep coming for them.
And run against them.
Yes, both the income.
Right, yes.
So thank you very much for your time. And it was very educational. I think all three perspectives were valid, a really comprehensive approach. Just following up with that question, and I think it's also Avery's first question, interesting, was about this accountability. I can't let it go. And it's because what I heard you say was you have to show up and stay engaged. That's great. And when you do, sometimes it doesn't work out for the community. And if it's on money, why should we accept it? So are there any great ideas about how that game can be changed? It's not so much on the ethics side, right? But just in terms of accountability and what do the constituents want and are they getting it? Is there anyone out there thinking about how to shift the dynamic so we don't have to, you know, play it this way?
It
Or is that just
sounds
the
like you
nature of
are.
politics? No, I have a great
What's your
idea,
name?
but- Karen.
Yeah, Karen's thinking of it right now. The best way to hold a politician accountable, the ultimate way to hold a politician accountable, period, is to, no, it's not to vote them out, it is to run against them, right? It is to run against them. It is to provide them with an opponent, especially at the hyper-local level. You know how many votes I got at Chad Hills Charter School for chairman of the board? 7. You know how many votes my mayor got at Chattanooga Hills, Georgia? 300. 300. There's 1,700 people that vote in that city, right? Like, run against them. If you really are upset by them, like, you can show up to a community meeting, you can be upset at that community meeting, you can ask those people for power, or you can be power. Run against them.
So I agree that there should be someone that runs against them, but you always still should have someone else to hold them accountable because, as I've said, seeing this for 30 years, you see people who start out as a good public servant and 10 years, 15 years later, they shouldn't be there. They get too comfortable in this system. You know, they've raised the salary on a lot of elected officials, and so they see it as their seat versus the people's seat. So we have to reframe it that this is the people's seat, this is the people's money, and this is what we demand. But that takes a multicultural coalition. It can't just be Black people saying we need affordable housing in the city of Atlanta. It's not going to be affordable for anyone. But unless the coalition looks a little bit different, and that people are willing to come out of their comfort zones to say, I'm going to stand with these folks over here and demand that we have community benefits around these stadiums. I'm going to demand that this school system improve, even though I don't have a kid in this school system. So we have to have unlikely coalitions that are willing to work together.
Last question. Yes. Okay.
So, my name is Rohit, and I'm a little bit newer to figuring out what's going on around the city, and I'm always looking for new ways to get information, and I was wondering what you guys use to aggregate news around the city.
Well, we have a lot of interns, so we have interns that pull up articles and things that we have. I'm sure other people use other things to get news. I mean, you can Google just about anything, but the problem, I guess, or the challenge here is there are not a lot of progressive news outlets that cover social justice issues in this city because that's the unpopular position. So, you know, sometimes the underground news is the internet, is the Twitter. I see you blew everybody up this weekend on Twitter. But so sometimes it is those informal social networks in terms of news, as they call the underground media, versus the AJC.
I try to stay away from the news. It's mostly bad, but the thing that I like to pay, I really do try to stay away from the news. I like to develop niche expertise on something I can change and tune into data that's actionable and relevant to me about that thing. So for me right now, I got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, so what I care about right now is education. I want to make the public education system in my area as great as possible for my children because I'm committed to, I think most of the problems that we have in public education is rich white people opting to send their kids to places that are not, that are private schools. And I don't want to be a part of that. I pay a lot of attention to Georgia milestones, how it's measured, how it's being scored. I pay a lot of attention to the STAR the STAR map and Iowa Test of Basic Skills tests, and I pay a lot of attention to. Part of the reason I joined the board is so that I could get and understand individual teacher performance data, so that I could make the best decisions for my children that I possibly could, and for the other 550 children that go to my school.
Tonight we've learned quite a bit. I think that this is not going to be an easy, it's going to get done overnight. It looks like it's going to be kind of a constant fight. I'm so thankful that all three of the panelists are a part of that on a daily basis. They are thinking about this. They are trying to solve against the problem. And I think there are no perfect answers to this, but the goal of these types of conversations is to explore how we get there. As everyone alluded to, there is an election this year. We have a resource that we built out called voteatl.org, where all those sheets that y'all have are downloadable from there. You can see who's running for office. You can hear interviews that we had with each of those folks. And then thanks to our partners at Partnership for Southern Equity and Pro Georgia, and ATL is Ready, over 2,000 people were interviewed to create a grassroots platform on ourfutureatlanta.org, so you can read that as well. Stay engaged, stay involved. As always, these conversations are amazing. Can you all join me in thanking our panelists for tonight? And stay involved. We have a mayoral forum that we'll be announcing. It got rescheduled due to weather. We'll be rescheduling it for the month of October. We'll keep you all posted with that. But thank you so much for being here tonight.
Okay.